There is a paradox in the human soul, as ancient as it is agonizing, an invisible dance between a passionate yearning for light and an inexplicable, almost instinctive return to familiar shadows. You build bridges to your dreams, erect magnificent castles of ambition, reach for the horizon where the cherished star of success shines. And just as the peak is almost within reach, when triumph seems inevitable, you suddenly feel an internal gravity, an invisible yet irresistible anchor, pulling you back to the starting point, to the familiar landscape of incompleteness. This is not external resistance, not ill fate or accident. It is something far more subtle, far more personal, as if a shadow architect residing in the deepest recesses of your being surgically places landmines beneath the foundation of your most cherished endeavors. This internal saboteur, this unseen disruptor, acts not out of malice, but from deeply ingrained, long-forgotten programs. It is a phantom limb of your psyche, reflexively pulling your hand away from the fire, even when that fire is the light of your own potential. The irritation that arises from this repetitive, exhausting cycle, from this bitter taste of incompleteness, from this unending game of catch-up with yourself. This is not merely a negative emotion. It is a powerful, crystallized signal. It is precisely where not just the key, but the very door to an unprecedented power lies hidden. For what appears to be an obstacle is, in reality, a distorted message, an encrypted signal from the depths of your subconscious. This internal break, this guardian of old patterns, means you no harm. It merely reproduces a lesson once learned, once a form of protection. And if you learn to decipher its language, to transform its energy, you will understand the force that now seems destructive can become your greatest ally, a guiding star to true freedom. This strange, almost mystical urge to retreat, this paradoxical call of the abyss that beckons you from the very summit, is not a condemnation, but an invitation to deep exploration, to an archaeological excavation of your own soul, where each layer holds the imprints of past decisions and forgotten truths. But where does this paradoxical mechanism originate? At what precise moment in your personal history, at what crossroads of fate, did this internal saboteur first receive its mandate for invisible control over your decisions and actions, condemning you to an eternal cycle of almost achieved and inexplicably lost? Allow us to trace the invisible threads of your destiny back to their inception. That internal saboteur we spoke of, that mysterious gravity relentlessly pulling you towards the unfinished, is not an innate flaw of the soul. On the contrary, it is a meticulously constructed edifice, brick by brick, forged in the crucible of your formative years. The question is not what holds you back, but when this seed of self-limitation was sown. Recall those qualities that seem indispensable for unleashing your true power, for creating a vibrant tapestry of self-realization, the audacious spark of ambition, the righteous fire of healthy aggression that carves out space for your truth, the liberating freedom to err, stumble, and learn, and the profound, transformative courage of vulnerability. When in the tender dawn of your existence were these vital shades of your being painted over with the muted tones of unacceptable, shameful, or dangerous, Perhaps it was the echo of silence after your boldest childhood declaration, met not with applause, but a parent's tired sigh, a teacher's dismissive glance, or a peer's mocking laughter. Budding ambition, eager to soar, was suddenly tethered to the ground, deemed too loud, excessive, demanding. You learned, perhaps without words, that wanting too much meant risking disapproval. Standing out meant inviting isolation. Or recall the natural, instinctive assertion of boundaries, the primal growl of a child defending their toy or space, a healthy manifestation of self-preservation, a nascent form of healthy aggression. Was this met with swift, punitive reprimand? Good girls don't act that way. Real men don't get angry. Be compliant or no one will like you. And so the vital energy of self-assertion, mistakenly labeled aggression, was driven underground, forced to transform into passive resistance or self-sabotage so as not to incur the wrath of the very figures who should have nurtured your growth. And what of the right to err, to stumble, to explore the labyrinth of trial and error? Was every misstep magnified, every imperfection met with a critical gaze, a disappointed frown, or a harsh consequence? If only perfection was rewarded, if only flawlessness guaranteed acceptance, then the terrifying prospect of imperfection became a barrier, an unspoken decree that to fail was to be unworthy. To be seen in your vulnerability was to be ridiculed or abandoned. The tender shoots of authentic expression, needing space to experiment, were instead pruned back lest they deviate from the prescribed path of flawless conformity. In these quiet, often forgotten moments, the fundamental blueprints of your internal saboteur were etched into the very fabric of your developing psyche. These were not malicious intentions, but often the unconscious transmission of fear, societal norms, or unresolved anxieties from those who raised you. Nevertheless, their impact was profound. They taught you to disown parts of yourself, to exile essential qualities into the shadow realms of your being, believing them to pose a threat to your belonging, your safety, or your love. You learned to dim your own light, not out of weakness, but out of a deep, though misguided instinct for survival within the perceived rules of your early world. The very qualities that now draw you towards your full potential were once deemed too costly to express. This complex architecture, built on the foundation of past lessons, continues to operate, often imperceptibly, dictating the subtle gravitational pulls that keep us from fully embodying our power. And in understanding these origins, we begin to discern the path to their transformation. This intricate dance between what has been learned and what yearns to be reclaimed is a universal human experience, manifesting in countless forms, each with its echoes of ancient wisdom and forgotten truths. We have already discussed how at the very core of our striving for wholeness and light lies an invisible architect of repetition, that same for sure internal saboteur who with methodical precision returns us to the familiar labyrinths of incompleteness. But this is not a malevolent force. No, it is merely an echo of long past decisions, a reverberation of self-denial that once seemed the only path to safety, to acceptance, to survival. And it is here at this crossroads where a bright future meets the shadow of the past that one of the greatest paradoxes of the human psyche unfolds. What we exile from ourselves does not disappear. It merely goes underground, gathering strength, awaiting its moment to reassert itself. Imagine that in the depths of your soul exists an ancient tribe, and at some point in your early history, you decided to banish a part of yourself from it. Perhaps it was your audacious ambition, capable of moving mountains, but met with a cold stare or mockery, or your fierce thirst for justice, suppressed for the sake of family peace, or perhaps fragile vulnerability hidden behind a mask of composure to avoid pain. These qualities, these aspects of your authentic essence were expelled from the conscious self, denied the right to a voice, to existence within your inner world. They became exiles from the tribe, abandoned, forgotten, but not destroyed. They continue to live in the shadows, accumulating the energy of resentment, non-acceptance, unrealized potential. This energy, like an unpaid bill, does not vanish without a trace. It accumulates like interest on a long-standing debt, and sooner or later demands payment. Every time we encounter recurring, unpleasant scenarios in topic of the issue, every time we feel inexplicable resistance on the path to what we desire, it is merely a reminder that the bill is unpaid. These are the exiled parts returning, demanding their recognition, their integration. They are not seeking revenge. They are merely striving for wholeness, for reunion with what they were torn from. In ancient Greek mythology, there are the Erinyes, or Furies, goddesses of vengeance who relentlessly pursue those who committed a crime, especially against family ties, until the guilty party atones or purifies themselves. They were born from the blood of Uranus, spilled by his son Cronus, symbolizing the inevitability of retribution for violating cosmic order. In the context of our psyche, these Erinyes are not external forces, but internal ones. They are those very exiled aspects of our soul that, like the Furies, relentlessly pursue our consciousness, our ego, until we acknowledge their existence, until we grant them the right to be. Their revenge is not punishment, but a persistent demand for attention, a signal that something important has been cast aside, something valuable rejected. And until these internal Furies are heard, until their energy is integrated, they will continue to create the very scenarios we perceive as sabotage. Understanding this mechanism opens the door to the deepest transformation. For if these forces are merely parts of us demanding attention, then the key to changing topic of the issue lies not in fighting them, but in recognizing them. And sometimes, to see these shadows, it is enough to turn our gaze to those who evoke in us particularly strong, irrational irritation, anger, or contempt. We have spoken of internal gravity, of those invisible threads that pull us towards familiar incompleteness, towards the habitual cycle of self-sabotage. But how do we recognize this invisible saboteur, this shadow architect, when it doesn't whisper from within, but is reflected externally in the faces of others? The soul, like an ancient mirror, sometimes shows us not itself, but what we have turned away from within ourselves. And in this reflection, in this distorted echo, we find the keys to our own aspects exiled into the shadow. Look closely at the landscape of your internal irritation. What types of people, in the context of your aspirations for growth, for light, for authenticity, cause you irrational hatred, sharp contempt, or a burning, almost physical irritation? Not that slight discontent that is fleeting, but that deep pulsating feeling that consumes you, deprives you of peace, makes you repeatedly replay others' words and actions in your mind. This is not just a reaction. It is a signal. It is a beacon pointing to the territory of your own shadow, to those qualities that you may have once rejected within yourself, declared taboo, exiled from the conscious tribe of your soul. Allow me to name just two of these shadow bearers whose images so often stir an internal storm within us. The first is the eternal victim. This is someone who is constantly trapped by circumstances, who masterfully finds external reasons for any failure, who seems to feed on sympathy, and at the same time refuses the slightest responsibility for their fate. They do not seek a solution, but validation of their powerless righteousness. There is no spark of rebellion in them, only a quiet, monotonous whine, which paradoxically can be far more destructive than open aggression. Their existence is an eternal cycle of waiting for a Savior who never comes, because salvation lies within, but the victim refuses to see it. The second is the cynical observer. This is someone incapable of genuine involvement, who meets any impulse to act, any dream or ambition, with caustic skepticism, a devaluing remark, or even cold indifference. They do not create, but criticize. They do not participate, but judge. Their world is an impregnable fortress from which they throw stones at those who dare to step beyond the accepted, who risk being vulnerable, who dare to believe. They seem to be frozen in a point of detachment, afraid of being hurt, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being seen without their mask of omniscience and invulnerability. Let me give a brief example. Imagine Martha. She dreams of writing a book, but every time she sits down, she finds 1,000 reasons not to start. Either there's no inspiration, or no time, or it's too noisy, or too quiet. And then she meets an old acquaintance, Alexei, who also seems full of ambition, but his whole life is an endless series of almosts. He almost started his business, almost went on a round-the-world trip, almost wrote a screenplay, and every time Martha hears his stories, a wave of irrational, burning indignation rises within her. How can one live like that? Her inner voice whispers, though she herself is essentially stuck in the same trap, only with a different set of excuses. Her irritation towards Alexei is nothing other than anger at her own hidden victim part. That part living within her, preventing her from moving forward, hiding behind imaginary obstacles. These archetypes, these living reflections of our suppressed qualities, carry not only shadow, but also potential. For behind every demon, behind every distorted form, lies a primordial, pure force that was once exiled. We paused at the threshold where a reflection in another's eye suddenly takes on the contours of something long forgotten, yet painfully familiar. Something we so fiercely rejected in ourselves and then exiled outwardly just to avoid acknowledging it. These shadows are not curses, but distorted visages of primal forces locked in the prison of non-recognition. They carry not vice, but an encrypted message about a value, a right, that we ourselves forbade ourselves, hiding it from the light of consciousness. Take, for example, the one we termed the eternal victim. In their endless complaints, in their inability to take responsibility for their own fate, in their attraction to drama and suffering, we see something repulsive, evoking a mix of irritation and pity. But what if behind this mask of powerlessness, behind this endless search for an external culprit, lies a deep almost mystical need for connection, for support, for unconditional love, for the right to be vulnerable? What if this is not weakness, but a distorted call from that part of us that desperately yearns to be accepted, to be seen in its authenticity, in its human fragility, the ability to surrender to the flow of life, to trust the world and others, to ask for help without shame or humiliation? This is what was exiled into the shadow. We forbade ourselves to be weak, needy, because once this natural weakness was punished, devalued, or ignored, turning into a source of pain rather than a bridge to intimacy. We denied ourselves the right to support, the right to be imperfect, the right to receive help, believing that it would make us dependent, insignificant, or deprive us of precious autonomy. And now this suppressed part manifests as the victim who paradoxically demands attention but does not know how to ask for it in a healthy, mature way, or receives it through suffering, through manipulation of guilt. They are not so much crying out for their need to be carried as they are inadvertently creating circumstances in which that seems to be the only option. The valuable capacity we exiled into the shadow is not weakness, but the right to vulnerability, to deep trust in the world and others, to genuine interdependence, not confusing it with helplessness or parasitism. It is the right to be loved and accepted not for one's unbreakable strength, but for one's authenticity, for one's human imperfection. Or let's recall the cynical observer, their caustic comments, their detachment, their seeming non-involvement, their ability to devalue any endeavor before it has even blossomed. All this provokes righteous anger, irritation, a desire to distance oneself. But what if in their critical gaze, in their skepticism, in their ability to see flaws where others see only brilliance or potential, lies hidden the power of insight, depth of thought, strategic vision? What if this is not a refusal to act, but a hypertrophied, distorted manifestation of the ability for deep analysis, for sober, impartial judgment, for foresight of possible obstacles and traps? We exiled from ourselves the right to doubt, to healthy, constructive criticism, to the distance that allows one to see the whole picture without rose-tinted glasses. Perhaps once our curiosity, our uncomfortable questions, our attempt to see the underside or question authority were perceived as rebellion, as disrespect, as a threat to established norms, and to avoid condemnation to be good, we sealed within ourselves this ability for a sober, sometimes unpleasant gaze, for intellectual independence. Now it manifests as paralyzing cynicism, which destroys not only others, but most tragically, our own endeavors, depriving us of faith in the possibility of success. The valuable capacity we rejected is not just the right to independent thought, but the right to deep, authentic wisdom that is not afraid to be unpopular, to insight that sees through facades, to the ability to protect oneself and one's resources from wasted effort and illusions. These demons are merely shadows of our own, once living and necessary aspects, distorted by fear and prohibitions. They are not enemies, but messengers pointing to the treasures we ourselves buried deep in the ground. By forbidding ourselves to be vulnerable or insightful, we did not get rid of these qualities. We merely deprived ourselves of the ability to use them consciously, turning them into subconscious saboteurs. The irony of fate is that precisely these suppressed forces, locked in the prison of the shadow, become the source of our recurring failures, our invisible obstacles on the path to what we so passionately desire. It is the fear of being like these rejected archetypes, these demons, that makes us repeatedly make choices that in reality lead us away from our true goals, from our authentic realization, creating a vicious cycle of self-sabotage. We have spoken of the shadows, those exiled aspects of ourself that, like the ancient Erinyes, haunt consciousness until they are recognized. But what is the price of this non-recognition? What is the real, tangible cost of turning away from these internal demons, refusing to see in them the distorted faces of primordial forces? This price is not merely discomfort, not an ephemeral unease. It is missed opportunities, destroyed projects, unrealized dreams, and a chronic feeling of internal unfreedom that pierce the very core of our path to wholeness and true potential. See how this manifests in life. Imagine a person obsessed with striving for an ideal, perpetually dissatisfied with themselves and their achievements. They see the eternal victim in anyone who asks for help, who admits their vulnerability, who allows themselves to make mistakes and take responsibility for the consequences. In their world, victim is synonymous with weakness, shame, incapacity. And so when an insurmountable obstacle arises on their path to an ambitious goal, be it a complex project requiring teamwork or a personal crisis that throws them off balance, they refuse to ask for support. They do not delegate, fearing to appear incompetent. They do not admit their mistakes, fearing to be seen as a failure. Their fear of being like the very victim they despise forces them to take on an unbearable burden, to work themselves to exhaustion, to ignore signs of burnout. The result? The project collapses, relationships crack, health fails. Not because they are weak, but because their fear of the ghost of weakness prevented them from utilizing the natural need for support, for vulnerability, for the right to be human, not a flawless machine. Or take another, one who sees in every critical remark, in every doubt, in every questioning glance, the traits of the cynical observer. One who, in their conviction, only destroys, devalues, and hinders progress. This person may possess a sharp mind, an ability for deep analysis and strategic thinking, but when faced with a task requiring an unconventional solution, or when obvious flaws appear in their project, they remain silent. They are afraid to express their true, sometimes biting, but so necessary for breakthrough thoughts. They suppress the healthy criticality within themselves that could save the situation because their internal censor whispers, "Don't become that cynic who devalues everything. Don't be the one who is always dissatisfied." They avoid confrontation, even if it is constructive, just to avoid being associated with the image they so strongly reject. As a result, their projects remain mediocre, their ideas are not fully realized, and their potential as an analyst and strategist remains untapped, buried under layers of fear of being judged for independent thought. How does your fear of being like these demons, the eternal victim or the cynical observer, make you make unfavorable decisions on the path to realizing your true potential? It makes you refuse help when you need it, silence the voice of your intuition when it screams of a trap. Avoid risk when it is necessary for growth. Suppress healthy aggression when you need to assert your boundaries. Or conversely, be excessively rigid when flexibility is required, just to avoid seeming soft. You unconsciously choose detours that lead to dead ends just to avoid stepping onto the path that, as you believe, leads to resembling the rejected shadow. And here, a natural objection arises. But if I accept these parts, won't I then truly become what I despise? Won't I turn into a helpless victim or a caustic cynic who sees only flaws? This is a deep and valid concern. However, the essence of integration is not to become your demon. The essence is to reclaim those primal, healthy impulses that were distorted and exiled. Acknowledging your need for support does not mean becoming a victim. It means gaining the courage to be vulnerable, which is the foundation of true strength. Acknowledging within yourself the capacity for critical analysis and doubt does not mean becoming a cynic. It means developing insight and strategic thinking that allow you to see the truth and make correct decisions rather than blindly following others' instructions. Integration is not capitulation to the shadow, but it's transformation. It is a conscious choice that gives you control over the forces that previously controlled you from the underground. It is a return to wholeness, allowing you to act from the fullness of yourself, not from fear of being someone you are not. Sometimes, however, we not only reject what seems repulsive in ourselves, but also project onto others what is most valuable in ourselves, but not yet manifested. We have spoken of those who haunt us from the depths, of the shadows we project onto the world, experiencing inexplicable irritation, aversion, or fear. But there is another side to the coin, no less insidious in its ability to deprive us of our own power. This is what Carl Gustav Jung called the golden shadow, the radiant side of our psyche, full of unrealized potential, talents, and virtues that instead of claiming for ourselves, we generously bestow upon others. Imagine how often we, standing on the threshold of our own path and topic of the issue, freeze, blinded by another's light. We see genius in others, their unwavering confidence, their ability to create, achieve, influence. And as if enchanted, we attribute to them all the qualities that, in our opinion, are unavailable to us. This is not merely admiration. It is an act of unconscious self-denial where we voluntarily surrender our crown, handing it to another, convincing ourselves that they are more worthy of it. It is precisely here that the subtle, almost imperceptible sabotage lies, disrupting our progress in topic of the issue. When we see someone who brilliantly handles tasks that seem insurmountable to us, who possesses qualities we crave but do not find in ourselves, we create a projection. This projection is nothing other than a mirror of our own unrevealed gifts. We look at another's success and topic of the issue and tell ourselves, they can, but I can't. They have this talent, this fearlessness, this uniqueness that I lack, and thereby we lock up our own sources of power, condemning ourselves to the role of eternal spectator, not creator. Look into your life, into your aspirations and topic of the issue. Who is your idol, your object of unconditional admiration in this area? Perhaps it is someone who effortlessly overcomes obstacles that seem insurmountable to you. Or someone with a remarkable capacity for innovation while you feel trapped within old frameworks, or someone whose charisma attracts success to them while you feel invisible. What are your own talents and unrealized abilities that you have gifted to them? That very spark of genius you see in them, you may carry within yourself but refuse to acknowledge. That courage that seems alien to you may be waiting for its moment to manifest within you. This golden shadow is not an enemy, but an unwitting thief of our own treasures. It keeps us in a state of perpetual apprenticeship, preventing us from becoming masters. We admire someone else's light, failing to notice that we ourselves are capable of shining. We applaud another's triumph, forgetting our own untapped potential. This is not merely a projection, it's a refusal of our own greatness, a denial of the right to be fully ourselves, an abandonment of the path destined for us in issue topic. And until we reclaim these gifted qualities, we will feel incomplete, as if a part of our soul is held hostage by someone else. However, within this act of reclaiming our own strengths lies another paradox, for it's not only what we reject, but also what we excessively idealize that demands a deep, conscious look. We've spoken of invisible shackles, of self-imposed limitations born from exiled fragments of our being. Now let us step beyond mere recognition into the realm of genuine reclamation. For the shadow, whether an ominous monster or an unattainable ideal, is not a prison to languish in, but a treasure trove awaiting its hour. The time has come to forge a new philosophy, one that transcends the binary of light and shadow, inviting us to reclaim our power not despite our projections, but through them. Every moment of irritation, every pang of envy, every surge of admiration, all are signposts, breadcrumbs leading back to a lost part of ourselves. Consider this: the energy we expend judging, rejecting, or idealizing others is, in essence, our own life force projected outward. Imagine it as thin tendrils of your vital essence reaching out and clinging to reflections in the world instead of being rooted within you. This new philosophy then states, every projection is an invitation to reclaim a piece of your sovereign self. It is an act of alchemical recuperation, transforming the lead of unconscious reaction into the gold of conscious integration. The inner saboteur is not an enemy to be defeated, but a displaced part of your will yearning for reunification. When we reclaim healthy aggression from the cynical observer or genuine vulnerability from the eternal victim, we don't become them. We become more of ourselves, whole and powerful. Here's a practical exercise, a simple yet profound ritual for this reclamation. Let's call it the mirror of invisible power. Over the next week, choose one person or situation each day that evokes a strong, disproportionate emotional reaction in you, be it intense irritation, inexplicable envy, or even overwhelming admiration. 1. Observation. Without judgment, simply observe your reaction. What specific quality, trait, or behavior in this person triggers such a response in you? Be precise. Is it their apparent arrogance, their effortless charm, their obvious weakness? 2. Reflection. Now turn your gaze inward. Ask yourself, where does this quality reside within me? How might I have suppressed it if it's a negative projection or disowned it? If it's a positive, idealized projection. For instance, if someone's arrogance infuriates you, ask, where is my own healthy self-assertion, perhaps distorted into a fear of being too much? If you admire someone's effortless creativity, ask, where is my own creative impulse, perhaps buried under self-doubt or the belief that I lack talent? 3. Reclamation. Write down how this quality, if it were to return to you in its purest, healthiest form, could serve your highest good. How can suppressed arrogance become powerful confidence? How can admired creativity become your own artistic expression? How can despised weakness become authentic vulnerability and the ability to ask for help? Visualize yourself embodying this integrated quality. Feel its power flowing back into you. This is not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you truly are, free from the distortions of fear and idealized images. This practice, performed consistently, begins to dismantle the subtle mechanisms of self-sabotage, transforming scattered energy into focused intention. This journey into the depths of yourself, this meticulous work of reclaiming what was lost, is not just an intellectual exercise. It's a living, breathing alchemy that reweaves the very fabric of our being. And yet, to truly embody this wholeness, to allow these newly integrated aspects to manifest in the world, requires more than just inner work. It demands a different kind of courage, a commitment to action. For what happens when the reclaimed parts of the self are ready to emerge, to build, to create in a world that often resists profound change? How do we navigate the external landscape with this newfound inner strength? And what happens to our will when it encounters the friction of reality?